In this video, I'll be demonstrating how to complete on your own 15-2. So here we are on the assignments page in Blackboard again. As usual, I'm going to click the Here link, which will take me to the instructions for the assignment. And I'm going to pull those to a different screen here so I can see them. And we'll just go ahead and begin. Step 1, open the file hours, which is right here. Notice there are two files here. You will not need the singleton. You will only need the hours spreadsheet, so go ahead and click on that. And in my case, I'm using Google Chrome, so it drops it to the bottom here, and I can just click on that and open it. Now in my case, I'm going to have to click Enable Editing at the top in order to make changes to it. And also step 1 wants me to save it, and of course it's going to give you a naming convention, which we will ignore because we already have a naming convention that we are going to use in the class. And it is last name underscore first initial underscore OYO15-2 in this case. And I don't have to worry about putting the file extension because Excel will automatically add the XLSX on the end of it. And we are ready to go. So step 2, in the documentation worksheet, which is where we are here, enter your name in cell B3. Okay, just type that in and hit enter. And use the today function in cell B4. So I'll hit equal today, open and close paren, and hit enter, and it keys in today's date. And then step 3 wants us to go over to the template worksheet, which is where we are here. And in cell A2, which is here, enter a formula to display the author name from the documentation worksheet by typing equal and then clicking cell B3 in the documentation worksheet. Okay. So I'm going to hit equals here, and then I'm just going to use my mouse to navigate back over to the documentation worksheet while I'm still editing the formula, okay? And then simply click on B3. Notice how it puts the little dashes around the cell, and just hit enter. And that's it. Notice how it's got the author's name in here, and if you look in the formula bar, it has cell B3, but before that, it has the name of the other worksheet, documentation, and an exclamation point. Okay, that's actually the nomenclature if you want to refer to cells in different worksheets, which makes Excel even more powerful. Okay, so you don't have to just refer to cells in the spreadsheet you're on, but you can refer to cells in other worksheets. And you can actually even refer to cells in other workbooks, entirely separate Excel files if you wish. Okay, step 4, it says in cell E7, which would be right here, enter a formula to multiply the yearly vacation days, which would be the cell right above E6, by 8 to calculate the yearly vacation hours. So this is easy. I'm just going to click equals, and then I'm going to click on E6 times 8, hit enter. And step 5 wants us to do the same thing for the yearly personal days, so we'll just hit equal and click on the personal days times 8, hit enter. That's easy enough. Make sure you use formulas for these instead of just typing in the answers, okay? Alright, step 6. Now here's where it gets interesting because we're going to have to write a whole bunch of formulas here in order to make this work. And before we do that, let's take a quick peek at what the spreadsheet is supposed to do, because that often helps us to figure out how to write the formulas if we understand the purpose of the spreadsheet. So in this case, we have a number of weeks here. Each line here is going to represent a single week's worth of hours. Okay, so we've got the hours worked that week, and then how many vacation, personal, or comp time hours has been used by the employee that week. Okay, and then we have a column for total hours, comp hours earned, and then we have some balances for vacation, personal, and comp. Notice those mirror these 3 columns here, okay? And so we'll go ahead and start in cell F13. Now, these cells here, these columns, B through E, they're going to be for typing in data, okay? That is, the user would key this data in, but starting in F13 and for all the other columns over here, they will be calculated. There will be formulas in there, okay? So once we get the formulas, you wouldn't allow a user to key data in. They would only key data over here, and then the formulas would automatically compute over here, okay? All right, so step 6 in cell F13, which is where I am here, write an if function that tests whether the hours worked cell, that's cell B13 here, for the record that you're on, the row that you're on, okay, is blank. If it is, display nothing in the cell. All right, so let's start with that before I go any further. we'll say equals if, because you got to always use equals to begin your formula. And I'm immediately going to open my paren, and the easy way to test if a cell is blank is use the isBlank function. Is blank, okay? Now I'm going to open another parenthesis here, and notice it's saying, okay, just what value do you want? And the value that I want to test is B13 if it's blank. So I'm just going to click on that, which enters B13 in my formula. Okay, now I need to close my paren, and now I'm back to the if function. Okay, so if and then logical test, that's the first argument. So the first argument we have entered is blank B13. That's the test. So we're going to hit our comma here, which goes to the next argument, value if true. So if this is true, I don't want to return anything. So I'm just going to use double quote, double quote. Okay, that tells it to just put nothing in there. And then hit my comma again, and now what do I want to do if the value is false? Okay, so think about what's happening here. If B13 is blank, if you say it that way, it makes more sense. If B13 is blank, then I don't want to display anything here. But if it's not blank, then here's what I want to do. And that's what the false condition would be that we're fixing to build here, okay? So the second part of step 6 says, otherwise, okay, return the sum of the hours worked plus the other hours used cells. That'd be range C13 through E13, okay, for that row to calculate the total hours per week. So in other words, if it's not blank, then we want to add B13 plus the sum of these 3 columns here. Okay, I'm going to close my paren, and now I'm going to have to close one more set of parens for the if statement, okay, and then hit enter. Now, you see nothing happened, and the reason is because, well, there's nothing in B13, right? So the is blank B13 is actually true. So it's going to fire off the true condition, which is to display nothing. So it's actually doing exactly what we told it to. Now, I'm going to skip ahead a bit, and if you look down on step 15, it says enter values for week 1 and week 2 to test that the formulas you entered work as expected. And we'll get to that. But honestly, I think it's a lot easier if we key the data as we go so that we can check to make sure that it's working. So I'm just going to key in 40 hours here for record 1. And see, when I do that, notice that cell F13 populates automatically. See? Because now B13 is no longer blank, so the true condition for this if statement is no longer met. Therefore, the false condition fires off rather than the true condition, which would be adding B13 plus the sum of C13 through E13. In other words, it's just adding these 4 columns together. Now, in this formula, instead of saying B13 plus the sum of C13 through E13, I could have just said sum of B13 through E13, and that's fine too. The only reason I did it that way is because that's the way the instructions are written, and I think it's a bit clearer to do it exactly as they are written. But those two methods would be equivalent, okay? Okay, moving along to step 7. This is a very long step, okay? So I'm going to try to work my way very slowly and methodically through this so that you can follow along. In cell G13, which would be here, we're going to create a nested if function. That means we're going to use an if within an if, okay? First, write an if function that tests whether the hours worked cell for that row, which would be the B13, is blank, and then display nothing in the cell if that is the case. So it is going to start out pretty much the same way as the other one. If is blank, B13, then display nothing. Else, okay, now here's where it gets more interesting. Otherwise, write another if function that tests whether the hours worked, B13, is less than or equal to the hours per week amount in cell E5, which would be here, the 40 hours, okay? If it is, display 0. Otherwise, subtract the hours worked per week amount in cell E5 from the value in the hours worked cell B13 for that row to calculate the comp hours earned. All right, so before we do all of that, that gets really complicated very quickly. It's really not that complicated if you think about what's happening. So the hours worked per week is 40, right? What we're doing is we're just calculating how many comp hours someone earned. What that means is if they work more than whatever's in this cell here, which would be 40, then they earn comp hours for any hours worked over that. In other words, they work 42 hours, then they earn 2 comp hours. That's really all we're doing, okay? So here again, we're testing if it's blank and if it is displaying nothing. So we need to do one more test to see if the number of hours they worked is greater than whatever the value is in E5, the 40. Okay, we don't want to just use 40. We want to actually refer to cell E5. That way we can always change cell E5 and everything else will automatically calculate. Okay, so anything that you can calculate and refer to cells, you want to do that because then you set up the spreadsheet to be automatic and dynamic. So here I'm just going to keep typing if, okay, and we're going to refer back to B13, less than or equal to, and I can put those together, less than or equal to, and I'm just going to refer to E5, then I want to display 0. Okay, in other words, they worked 40 hours, so they didn't earn any comp time, so that'll be 0. And another comma, and this is the value, is false. So this means they actually earned some. So what we're going to do here is subtract. We're going to take how many hours they worked minus the hours worked per week. And we're going to close our paren. And in this, I'm going to deliberately do this and skip a paren because Excel is going to tell you, hey, we found a typo in your formula and tried to correct it. See how it added the extra paren on the end because I forgot to put it? It says, do you want to accept this correction? In this case, yes, that's what I did. It won't always be correct, but in this case, it's pretty obvious what the problem is, so I'll just say yes, and now it's corrected my formula. Okay? Now, let's go over here and test it. I'm going to, instead of 40, I'm going to put 42. So, boom. See, it said now I've earned 2 comp hours because the 42 is 2 hours more than the cell in F5, or E5, excuse me. Now, there's one more thing that we need to do to this formula, and that is to make E5 absolute instead of relative. Now, the default in Excel is for your cell references to be relative so that when you copy and paste or you use the fill handle, the Excel automatically changes them accordingly. But in this case, we don't want that to happen because E5, that 40 up here, that only exists in that one place. So eventually we're going to copy these formulas down, but we don't want to do that. We don't want it to change E5. We want this reference to be E5 forever. So the way to do that is I'm going to put my blinking cursor there right in front of E5 and hit the F4 key on my keyboard, and it puts $E$5. Okay, and I'm going to do the same thing for the E5 reference here, and then hit enter. That makes it hold them constant, and it will not change that reference. Okay, you can type in the $signs if you like. It's just F4 is a little bit simpler. It cycles. There's 4 different modes. There's an absolute, a relative, and 2 different mixed ones where you can have, for example, $E5 or E$5, right, as opposed to $E$5 or just E5. So there's 4 different ways, and hitting F4 will cycle through those 4 different options on any cell reference. Okay. All right. And by the way, the step 7, there's a hint that well, actually there's a couple of hints there. One of them tells you to make sure you use matching numbers of opening and closing parens, which Excel will tell you if you don't. That doesn't prevent you from getting the parens in the wrong places, though. You can still use the right number, but hit them in the wrong place, and then you may get a result that's not what you intended. But then the other hint it tells you is make sure to use absolute references for the hours per week, which is the E5 that we did. All right, so moving along to step 8. In cell H13, which would be here, the vacation, write an if function. Make sure I'm in the right place here. Yes, that tests whether hours worked cell is blank. Okay, so here again, it's the same sort of thing. If is blank, hours worked. Okay, then display nothing else. Okay, same sort of thing. We're going to subtract the value in the vacation cell, C13, for that row from the yearly vacation hours amount in E7. Okay, so that means we would do the yearly vacation hours here, that would be E7, minus whatever vacation they took for that week, and then close our paren. Okay, Now, here again, in this formula, we're going to need to make E7 absolute. So I'm going to hit my F4 and make it $E $7, okay? And then we could just test that. Let's say they took 4 hours of vacation time. Okay, see now it's 108 instead of 112. So it's going to keep a running balance there, right? But now, here the problem is they start out with 112, but as they take vacation time, you can't refer to 112 anymore because that's going to be updated potentially every week. So in step 9, what we're going to do is come down here one cell below that, and we're going to have to enter a different formula that calculates from the second record on. Okay, in other words, the calculations for the very first record will be different from the calculations for the second and successive records here. Okay, but they'll all be pretty much the same except for that comp one at the end. Okay, so step 9 in cell H14, which is here, write an if function that tests. Okay, so here again, same sort of thing. If is blank hours worked, then nothing otherwise. And so what it wants us to do now is subtract the vacation hours used for that row from the vacation balance in the previous row. So instead of using E7, we're going to use the vacation amount, the vacation balance immediately above us, okay, minus this one here. And we don't want to use absolute here because we want it to refer to the row immediately above us, which is going to change depending upon which row we're in. Close our paren, hit enter, and off we go. Now, if we want to test that, let's enter another. They worked, say, 40 hours this week. So, see, it automatically dropped the vacation time. They still have 108. But now let's say maybe they took 2 hours of vacation. So it's 106. See, so it looks like it's working properly. All right, now let's move on to step 10. In cell I13, which is here, write an if function that tests whether hours worked is blank. So if is blank, hours worked, display nothing, else. Subtract the value in the personal cell for that row from the yearly person hours amount in cell E9. So we're going to say E9 minus the personal cell, close our parens, and we need to make E9 absolute. Okay, so it's really the same formula as we use for vacation, except it's referring to the personal instead of the vacation. Okay, you'll see that a lot in Excel. They're almost identical with very minor changes. Okay, you can actually copy and paste this over and then make your modifications to it, because if you look at the formulas, see how they're very, very similar. But just be careful that you're getting the right cells. You can always double click on it and it highlights the cells that's in use in that formula in different colors, so that's kind of handy as well. Alright, so step 11 in cell I14, the cell immediately below it, we're going to have to do the same sort of thing here that we did for H14. Equal if is blank, whoops, wrong paren. Okay, otherwise we're going to take the cell immediately above us minus whatever the personal is for this row that we're on. Close our parens, don't use any absolutes for this, and off we go. We could test that here, maybe type 1 in, see how it excuse me, decremented that. Okay, in step 12 in J13, which would be here, write an if function that tests whether it's blank or not. Is blank, hours worked. Okay, same sort of thing. Otherwise, subtract the comp hours used for that row from the comp hours earned for that row. So there is nothing up here on the top for comp hours. What we're going to do then is say the comp hours earned for that row minus any comp hours used. Close our paren. There are no absolutes in this one. And so off we go. So in this case, they earned 2, they didn't use any, so they've got a balance of 2, right? So now here again, the second one here, this is step 13, is going to be different than the one above it. That's not uncommon either for the very first one to have a slightly different formula than all the rest of them. All right, so here again, do the same sort of thing. If I can type, if is blank, hours worked, otherwise, okay, what we're going to do here is we're going to take the balance and we're going to add any hours earned for that week minus any hours used for that week and close the paren. Okay, so that makes sense. Like carry the balance forward, add anything they earned, subtract anything they used, right? Which totally makes sense for what we're doing. We want to test it, just key 1 here and see how it decrements and keeps that balance, right? Maybe they use 2 and now they have 0 comp balance. You can key in over here and test the values to make sure they're working as they should, okay? Okay. All right. Copy the step 14, excuse me. Copy the formulas in the range F13 to G13, which would be here. Okay, you can't copy them all at the same time, okay? Because these two formulas here did not, it's the same formula all the way down. You don't need a separate formula for the second row. But here you do. So you can't go all the way across and copy them down at one time. That won't work. What you got to do is select F and G13, right? Then you use the fill handle here to drag that all the way down to 64, right there. Okay, again, you can't see anything, but if you click in there, you can see the formula, right? And then over here, for H, I, and J, 14, all right, then you're going to grab the fill handle and drag that all the way down to 64. So now you've got the entire table set up for it. Now they're, again, they're not going to display anything because the hours worked over here are blank. You could test that by keying more data in if you like, okay? And then step 15, this is the one that says enter values for week 1 and 2. You can actually key more data if you like to watch it work. It's actually easier to understand, I think, if you have data in there. In fact, I wish they would have had data in there for the entire 64-week period because that would have made more sense. But feel free to key. I'm not going to take any points off if you want to key data over here just to watch the formulas work, okay? Because I'm more interested that the formulas are accurate than what the data looks like, okay? And that's pretty much it. Step 16 just says save the workbook.